Most people that day saw just another lonely old man walk into a roadside cafe. They noticed the limp, the torn jacket, the look in his eyes like he hadn't spoken to anyone in days. But what no one knew, not the customers, not the waitress, not even Jason Statham sitting quietly in the back, was that this man wasn't just a veteran. He was a ghost from a war that never left him. And he carried a secret that could rewrite everything they thought they knew about American history. By the time Jason found out who he really was, it was too late for apologies and almost too late for redemption. But that moment hadn't come yet. At that point, it was just another quiet afternoon with the smell of rain on the highway and the flicker of a neon open sign in the window. Inside, the place felt stuck in time. Old coffee, older furniture, conversations no one cared to finish. The man entered slowly. His boots barely made a sound. His jacket, worn and patched with forgotten insignias, hung loosely from his shoulders like a flag no one saluted anymore. In one hand, he held a small bag, creased, faded, but clutched like something sacred. He chose the corner booth, always the corner, always facing the door. The room didn't notice him until a group of young men did. They laughed. At first, quietly, then louder, at his clothes, his silence, his age, the way he carried himself like someone who used to matter. But in that silence, something was building, a reckoning. And in the far booth, Jason Statham watched it all unfold, not knowing that by the end of that day, he would be the one standing before the nation, trying to right a lifetime of wrongs. And just before the man reached into his bag, Jason stood up, driven by instinct, but completely unaware of who he was about to defend. Most people that day saw just another lonely old man walk into a roadside cafe. They noticed the limp, the torn jacket, the look in his eyes like he hadn't spoken to anyone in days. But what no one knew, not the customers, not the waitress, not even Jason Statham sitting quietly in the back, was that this man wasn't just a veteran. He was a ghost from a war that never left him, and he carried a secret that could rewrite everything they thought they knew about American history. By the time Jason found out who he really was, it was too late for apologies, and almost too late for redemption. But that moment hadn't come yet. At that point, it was just another quiet afternoon, with the smell of rain on the highway and the flicker of a neon open sign in the window. Inside, the place felt stuck in time. Old coffee, older furniture, conversations no one cared to finish. The man entered slowly. His boots barely made a sound. His jacket, worn and patched with forgotten insignias, hung loosely from his shoulders like a flag no one saluted anymore. In one hand, he held a small bag, creased, faded, but clutched like something sacred. He chose the corner booth, always the corner, always facing the door. The waitress gave him a nod, more out of habit than kindness, and slid a glass of water onto his table. He didn't ask for anything, didn't need to. The silence said enough. But silence doesn't sit well with everyone. A group of young men occupied a table nearby, loud, careless, and bored enough to find humor in the vulnerable. They saw the old man, whispered, pointed, then laughed, first at the boots, then the patches, then at the man himself, whose only offense was surviving more than they could imagine. They mocked his hands, trembling slightly as he unfolded a napkin, mocked the way he sat, rigid, upright, as if still waiting for an order that would never come. To them, he was just another old man pretending to be important. To Jason, something felt different. He'd seen those kinds of hands before. Not just aged, disciplined, scarred. He'd seen that posture too. It wasn't stiffness, it was protocol. Jason watched, silent, his arms crossed, not tense, not relaxed, just aware. The old man remained still. Not a word, not a glance. But the weight of the ridicule hung heavy around him, and for a moment it seemed like he might just take it, like he had so many times before, until he did something that changed everything. He reached slowly into the worn bag beside him, pulled out a folded cloth and unwrapped it with care. Inside was a black and white photograph. It was yellowed, creased at the corners, but unmistakable. A young soldier, medals pinned across his chest, standing beside a general whose name the country had etched into textbooks. Jason narrowed his eyes. That uniform, that face. Something stirred inside him. A memory. Years ago, while filming on a military base, he'd seen a wall of honor. That photo had been there, but there had been no name, just a line that read, "The soldier who disappeared after saving them all." Jason blinked, as if trying to convince himself it wasn't the same man. But the shape of the jaw, the eyes, the scar near the temple, it was him. And he was sitting right there, being laughed at like he was nobody. The young men hadn't seen the photo. They were too busy with their jokes, too caught up in their noise. But Jason had seen enough. He slid out of his booth slowly and walked toward the man. No dramatic music, no confrontation, just a quiet decision to no longer remain still. And just before the man reached into his bag again, Jason stood beside him, shoulders squared, gaze calm, voice low but firm. The room didn't fall silent, not yet, but it was about to. Because what Jason was about to do, what he was about to uncover, would not only silence a room full of laughter, it would remind a nation that some heroes never wanted medals, they only wanted to be remembered. Jason didn't know his name yet. He didn't know what this man had done. But in that moment, standing beside him, he knew one thing. That man had once carried a nation on his shoulders, and now it was Jason's turn to carry him. Jason didn't leave the cafe right away. He stayed seated at that corner booth long after the man had disappeared into the rain. The medal remained on the table, small, heavy, and cold. But it radiated something deeper than metal. It radiated truth. Jason turned it over in his hand. There was no inscription on the front, no dramatic emblem. But on the back, barely legible beneath scratches and years of wear, was a name. Isaiah Beck. The name hit like a quiet explosion. He'd heard it before, once, maybe twice, not on TV, not in headlines, but in a dusty hallway of a military museum, etched into the margin of a display where forgotten names went to rest. Jason pulled out his phone. No distractions, no apps, just one purpose. He typed slowly, "Isaiah Beck, Operation Sentinel." For a few seconds, nothing came up but vague mentions, declassified reports, blogs full of speculation, a few conspiracy theories about a soldier who walked into hell and never came back. Then, he found it. A digital archive from a veteran-run database, buried deep, poorly formatted, rarely visited. It held a single article titled, "The Ghost Who Saved 39 Lives." Jason opened it and read in silence. Isaiah Beck had enlisted at 17, no parents, no attachments, no reason to hesitate. By 22, he had already earned multiple commendations for bravery, but it was Operation Sentinel that changed everything. An elite unit had been dropped behind enemy lines on what was supposed to be a 3-day extraction mission. They were ambushed within hours, cut off, supplies gone, communications severed. The official report listed them as lost. But 7 days later, one man emerged from the snow, dragging a fellow soldier on a makeshift stretcher. He didn't stop at the edge of the forest. He didn't ask for help. He went back, again and again. For 2 days straight, Isaiah pulled bodies out of the wilderness. Some alive, some barely, some dead. By the end, he had retrieved 38 men, one of them a general's son. That was when everything changed. According to the file, Isaiah was offered medals, ceremonies, even interviews, but he declined it all. Then, he vanished. No discharge papers, no press releases, just one signature on one form. I served. Let me go." Jason leaned back in his seat, stunned. He remembered the stories, vague rumors told between takes on movie sets or during military visits where veterans shook his hand and said, "You play tough guys well, but let me tell you about a real one." They'd never say his name, but now Jason had it, and the real man had just walked out of that cafe, alone, again. Jason stood quickly, grabbed the medal, and left enough cash on the table to cover the next 10 meals. Outside, the rain had softened to a drizzle. The parking lot was quiet. The veteran was gone. Over the next few hours, Jason searched. Not because he wanted to turn this into a media moment, but because something deeper inside him had shifted. He needed to know more. He needed to find him, not as an actor meeting a legend, but as a man seeking a mirror. He checked nearby shelters, veteran centers, even a local church. No one knew the name. No one recognized the photo. Until one volunteer at a small, run-down outreach center hesitated. She looked at the image, then back at Jason. "I think he comes here sometimes," she said quietly. "No name, just sits, doesn't ask for anything." Jason waited, and sure enough, just after sundown, the man arrived. Same boots, same bag, same silence. But this time, Jason was ready. He approached slowly, sat beside him on the bench, and laid the medal on the wooden slats between them. The man didn't look at it. He didn't need to. They both knew what it meant. Jason didn't speak at first. He just breathed. Because what do you say to someone the world forgot after they gave the world everything? He listened again. This time, not to war stories or battlefield memories, but to a simple truth. Isaiah had left because he believed that the greatest victories were the ones no one saw. Because when the war ended, he didn't want to be a symbol. He wanted peace. He wanted silence. And maybe he wanted to see if anyone would still recognize honor without the spotlight. Jason did. And for the first time in years, Isaiah smiled, just a flicker, just enough. And then Jason asked a question, not to expose him, not to exploit his story, but to honor him. "Would you let me tell them who you are?" The old man looked out across the lot, where cars passed like distant memories, and after a long pause he gave the smallest of nods, not for glory, but for memory, so the world wouldn't forget again. Jason opened his phone once more, not to search but to record, because if Isaiah Beck was finally ready to be known, the world had a right to listen. The next morning, Jason sat alone in his hotel room. The medal lay on the table beside a cup of untouched coffee, and the phone beside it displayed the recording he'd made the night before, a quiet, grainy audio file marked only by the name Isaiah Beck. It wasn't an interview. It wasn't even a conversation. It was a man sharing what he hadn't shared in decades. And though the words were sparse, their weight was immense. Isaiah didn't speak about strategy or politics. He didn't recount each step of the mission like a war documentary. He didn't name enemies. Instead, he spoke about the quiet moments, the eyes of soldiers who knew they wouldn't make it home, the silence after the gunfire, the snow, the cold so deep it felt like it had crept into his soul. He spoke about carrying the wounded across frozen ground, knowing some wouldn't live to see morning. He remembered one young man who clutched a Bible, not because he believed, but because it had belonged to his mother. He remembered the sound of a medic's voice growing fainter until all that was left was his dog tag swinging in the wind. And then he said something Jason would never forget. "I didn't leave the army. I just left the noise." Jason paused the recording, eyes glazed with something heavier than tears. In that single sentence, he understood it all. Isaiah hadn't vanished because he was broken. He vanished because the world couldn't bear to look into the eyes of someone who had seen too much and survived anyway. the war had ended. But the silence afterward was worse. He became a ghost by choice, not out of shame, but out of reverence. He believed the world needed to move on, and he didn't want to be a monument standing in the way, but even ghosts deserve to be remembered. Jason knew he had to do something real, not for the cameras, not for the clicks, but for every man and woman who had ever been forgotten after giving everything. That afternoon, Jason made phone calls to contacts, to veterans, to people who still held strings in the right rooms. He didn't say Isaiah's name. He didn't need to. All he said was, "I found him." At first, no one believed him. The man from the Sentinel operation had become a legend. One of those stories you pass on in silence, not expecting an answer. But Jason's voice carried something different: conviction, truth, and eventually, doors opened. A private ceremony was arranged, not in Washington, not on television, but in a small community center just outside the city. No press, no crowds, just silence, just respect, and Isaiah agreed to attend. When he walked into the hall, heads turned, but no one clapped. There was no music, no announcement. Only standing men and women, many in uniform, many not, forming a silent aisle as Isaiah passed through them. Some recognized him instantly, others only through the photos Jason had discreetly shared. But all of them understood that they were in the presence of someone who had once carried more than anyone ever should. Jason didn't give a speech. He simply stood beside Isaiah and let the silence say what no microphone ever could. A retired general approached, placed a single folded flag in Isaiah's hands and saluted, not because of rank, but because of reverence. And in that moment, something inside Isaiah softened. He didn't smile, he didn't cry, but his shoulders, always tight, finally loosened, and his eyes scanned the room, not in defense but in peace. He wasn't invisible anymore, and more importantly, he was no longer alone. After the ceremony, Jason and Isaiah sat outside on a wooden bench as the sun began to set. The air was still, cool, filled with a quiet that for once didn't feel heavy. Jason turned toward him. He didn't ask for another story, didn't press for a quote. He simply said, "They saw you." Isaiah nodded slowly. Then, for the first time since they met, he reached into his coat pocket, not for a photo or a medal, but for a worn, folded piece of paper. He handed it to Jason. On it were names, 39 of them, carefully written, no ranks, no units, just names, and at the bottom, "I carried them, now let them carry me." Jason felt the weight of that sentence bury itself into his chest, because this wasn't just about one man, it was about every forgotten soul who had walked through hell so others could live in peace. Isaiah stood slowly. He didn't say goodbye, he didn't need to. He simply walked away, head high, footsteps steady. And this time, Jason didn't follow. Because some men are not meant to be chased, they're meant to be remembered. The next morning, Jason woke up to hundreds of messages. Somehow, word of the ceremony had leaked, and what started as a quiet moment of honor was about to shake the entire nation. Jason didn't expect the story to travel. The ceremony had been private, intentionally so. No press releases, no posts, just a quiet moment for a forgotten hero. But silence, when filled with truth, has a way of echoing louder than noise. Someone at the ceremony had taken a single photo, not of Isaiah's face, but of the folded paper in Jason's hands with the 39 names and the final line, "I carried them. Now let them carry me." That image, accompanied by a single sentence, "They finally remembered him," was uploaded anonymously to a veteran forum. And from there, it spread like wildfire. By the time Jason woke up the next morning, his phone was flooded. Veterans he'd never met, journalists trying to confirm the story, former soldiers who had served under commanders who'd whispered Isaiah's name in training camps like a prayer. News anchors were calling him. Producers wanted interviews. Government officials wanted to honor the legacy publicly. But Jason ignored all of it. Because this wasn't about going viral, it was about setting something right. By sunset, the photo had been seen over 20 million times. People didn't just share it, they responded to it. Messages poured in from across the country. A mother wrote, "My son died in Afghanistan. I never knew who rescued him, until now." A man in his 70s sent a message, "He saved my father. I grew up hearing a name he never forgot, Beck." A former medic wrote simply, "Tell him we still remember." But Isaiah had no interest in headlines. When Jason met him that evening at their usual spot, a bench near the water, Isaiah was already watching the sky shift from gold to violet. Jason sat beside him, holding a printed copy of the image. He didn't say anything, just placed it gently on Isaiah's lap. The old man looked down at the photo for a long time, then folded it once, slowly, and tucked it into his jacket. No words, but something in his chest lifted, not because he was famous now, but because those 39 names had finally been spoken again by a country that had long forgotten how to say them. Days later, an official invitation arrived. The president wanted to meet Isaiah. A ceremony was planned, medals, flags, cameras. But Isaiah declined. Instead, he asked for something else, a simple memorial. No speech, no statue, just a stone engraved with 39 names, and one line beneath them, carried not for glory, but for each other. Jason made it happen. And when the stone was unveiled in a quiet cemetery reserved for unnamed heroes, a crowd gathered, not to cheer, but to weep. Families of the fallen came, veterans in wheelchairs, children holding faded photos, men with bent backs and worn hands, saluting in silence. And somewhere in the back, wearing the same old jacket, stood Isaiah Beck, watching, remembering, breathing. A single tear slipped down his face, not for himself, but for those he'd carried. And for the first time, it felt like the nation was carrying him back. The story didn't fade, it became part of history, not the kind taught in textbooks, but the kind passed from grandfather to grandson, father to daughter, friend to friend. A story about a man who never asked to be honored, only to be understood. And Jason, he never gave another interview, he never published a book, he didn't need to, because the greatest story he ever told was the one he almost didn't hear. Years passed. One morning, Jason returned to that cafe. Same table, same booth. He sat quietly looking toward the door, and for a moment, he imagined the sound of worn boots, the soft jingle of medals tucked in a bag, and a voice saying nothing, but saying everything. He placed a photo on the table, the original black and white image, a young soldier beside a general. Underneath it, he wrote just 5 words, "Now we carry you, Isaiah." And then he left it there, tucked beneath a coffee cup for someone else to find. Because stories like his don't end, they continue, one listener at a time. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that sometimes the quietest people have the loudest histories, then subscribe. Not for me, not for fame, but for the stories that still deserve to be heard. Because someone out there is waiting to be seen. And maybe you're the one meant to carry their name forward.